On Halloween night in 2011, a Tennessee mother returned home from a party and vanished, while her killer lived with her children for the next 11 years. The Halloween weekend of 2011 changed Dyersburg, Tennessee forever. Karen Swift, 44, disappeared after returning home from a party at the local country club. A mother of 4, known for her dedication to her children and her work as an aerobics instructor, Karen had seemed to be living a normal small-town life. But beneath the surface, her marriage was crumbling. Her white Nissan Murano was found abandoned on Millsfield Highway, a quarter-mile from her home. A flat tire, caused by a rusty screw, had forced her to stop. Her purse and keys were missing. The discovery sparked an extensive search that would reveal dark secrets hidden behind the facade of an ordinary family. David Swift, Karen's husband, reported her missing. His 911 call raised questions among investigators who noted something off in his tone, not quite panic, not quite calm. As search efforts expanded across Dyersburg, the community struggled to process how one of their own could simply vanish. Karen was well known around town. She cleaned houses and taught aerobics classes, always putting in extra hours to support her family. To her friends, she embodied resilience, a working mother who never complained about her long days. But those closest to her had begun noticing changes in the months before she disappeared. Her 17-year marriage to David had weathered serious problems. Both had been unfaithful at different points, including an affair of David's that resulted in a child. They had tried to move past it, but trust never fully returned. 3 weeks before she vanished, Karen had filed for divorce. The move to Dyersburg itself had caused tension. David had relocated the family from Arkansas abruptly, taking a manufacturing management job and buying a house without consulting Karen. Their oldest son, Preston, stayed behind to finish school, a decision that split the family during an already difficult transition. Friends began sharing concerning details with investigators. David's controlling behavior had escalated as Karen built her own life in Dyersburg. He tracked her movements, questioned her friendships, and pushed back against her working outside the home. Karen had confided in a few close friends about feeling trapped, though she never suggested she felt physically unsafe. The investigation revealed troubling patterns. Karen had obtained a secret second phone to maintain her privacy, a number investigators later found programmed into David's work phone, despite his claims of not knowing about it. Strange calls were logged during the period of her disappearance, raising new questions about what really happened that night. Weeks of searching ended in tragedy when a hunter discovered Karen's body in a cemetery less than 3 miles from her home. She had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The discovery transformed a missing persons case into a homicide investigation, with David Swift as the primary person of interest. But building a case proved challenging. Physical evidence was limited. The garage where prosecutors later theorized the murder occurred showed no traces of blood. David's medical records confirmed recent knee surgery, supporting his claim that he physically couldn't have committed the crime as alleged. His adult daughter, Ashley, insisted it was Karen, not David, who had moved her to a different room that night. The case went cold for over a decade until David's arrest in August 2022. Prosecutors built a circumstantial case, arguing that Karen's growing independence and impending divorce had pushed David to violence. They pointed to the secret phone, his controlling history, and suspicious behavior after her disappearance, the defense painted a different picture of a husband concerned about his wife's drinking and partying, not controlling her. They highlighted the lack of physical evidence and David's knee injury, arguing he couldn't have committed the murder as described. A physical therapist testified about David's severely limited mobility during that period. In a surprising outcome, the jury found David not guilty of first and second degree murder, but deadlocked on voluntary manslaughter charges, resulting in a mistrial. The case remains active, with David in custody awaiting a new trial on the manslaughter charge, while also facing stalking allegations from his most recent ex-wife in Alabama. The Swift case continues to haunt Dyersburg. For Karen's children and friends, questions still outnumber answers. The truth about what happened that Halloween weekend remains elusive, trapped somewhere between circumstantial evidence and reasonable doubt, between a troubled marriage and a tragic end. In many ways, Karen's story reflects broader truths about domestic violence. How control can escalate gradually, how victims often hide their fears, and how communities can miss warning signs until it's too late. Her case also demonstrates the challenges of prosecuting domestic homicides, especially when physical evidence is lacking and years have passed. Today, Karen's memory lives on through her children and the Dyersburg community. Her case has sparked important conversations about relationship violence and prompted local law enforcement to revise their approaches to domestic abuse cases. While justice remains incomplete, her story continues to drive change and awareness in the community she called home. On a cold December morning in 2011, the search for Karen Swift came to a grim end. Two local men, John Robinson and Mark Rickman, were visiting a cemetery less than 3 miles from the Swift home when they stumbled upon what investigators had dreaded finding. Karen's body lay hidden among the headstones, a discovery that transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The cemetery's location raised immediate questions. It was far enough from main roads to avoid casual discovery, yet close enough to suggest someone familiar with the area had chosen it. For weeks, search parties had combed the surrounding countryside, their efforts focused on more remote locations. The cemetery, hiding its secret in plain sight, had been overlooked. The medical examiner's findings painted a violent picture. Blunt force trauma to the head had killed Karen, with initial analysis suggesting she had been stomped on. But like many aspects of this case, even this conclusion would face scrutiny years later during trial. What remained clear was that Karen hadn't died at the cemetery. Someone had moved her body there after the fact. Inside the Swift home, investigators found curious details. 7 gallons of bleach sat in the garage, an amount that seemed excessive for household cleaning. David Swift explained it away as necessary for cleaning up after a neighbor's dog poisoning incident, but investigators noted this detail carefully. Karen's bedroom showed signs of disorder, though forensics teams couldn't definitively say whether this indicated a struggle or normal daily life. The investigation uncovered something telling: a second cell phone Karen had kept hidden from David. It was her attempt at privacy in a marriage showing signs of strain. Though David insisted he knew nothing about this phone, investigators found its number saved in his work phone. More troubling was activity detected on the phone's voicemail at 9:55 a.m. on October 30th, hours after Karen was last seen. The phone had connected to the family's Wi-Fi network, and David was the only adult home at that time. Ashley Swift's testimony added another layer of complexity. She had spent that last night with her mother and maintained firmly that it was Karen, not David, who had moved her to a different room. Years later at trial, Ashley's conviction hadn't wavered. "I'll go to my grave knowing it was my mom who moved me," she testified, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Questions about David's physical capabilities dominated much of the investigation. He showed up at the police station on crutches, pointing to a recent knee surgery as evidence he couldn't have committed the crime. This alibi seemed solid until a neighbor testified about seeing David help move 60-pound hay bales during the same period, no crutches in sight. The contradiction caught investigators' attention. Friends painted a picture of a controlling marriage reaching its breaking point. They described David constantly checking up on Karen when she went out, confronting her about who she talked to, where she went. The divorce papers Karen filed 3 weeks before her death seemed to mark a final push for independence. Some who knew the couple saw this as the moment everything changed. The case might have remained unsolved if not for prosecutor Danny Goodman's decision to take a fresh look during the COVID-19 pandemic. While courthouse activity slowed to a crawl, Goodman's team methodically worked through 30 bins of case files. Instead of searching for a smoking gun, they built a circumstantial case around David's apparent loss of control over Karen. Their theory placed the murder in the family's garage, though physical evidence supporting this scenario proved elusive. The prosecution faced an uphill battle in court. They couldn't explain the absence of blood evidence in the garage or car. They had no proof David left the house that night. Even their theory about Karen being stomped to death lost ground when the medical examiner revised their opinion. David's physical therapist provided detailed testimony about his limited mobility, making the prosecution's version of events seem increasingly unlikely. When the verdict came, it reflected the case's complexity. The jury found David not guilty of murder, but couldn't reach agreement on voluntary manslaughter charges. The split decision led to a mistrial on the manslaughter count, leaving the door open for a future trial. Today, David Swift awaits a new trial on the manslaughter charge. In an ironic twist, he also faces stalking allegations from his most recent ex-wife, Kelly Esmond, in Alabama. The case that began with Karen's disappearance continues to evolve, leaving the Dyersburg community with questions that may never find complete answers. Like many domestic violence cases, the Swift investigation reveals how challenging these crimes can be to prosecute. Physical evidence often proves elusive, circumstances remain ambiguous, and years of family dynamics create a complex backdrop that defies simple explanations. Karen's case stands as a reminder that sometimes the truth lies scattered across dozens of small details, none conclusive on their own, yet together telling a story that continues to demand resolution. The investigation into Karen Swift's death seemed destined to remain unsolved. For over a decade, the case sat in evidence storage, its files gathering dust as leads went cold and witnesses' memories faded. David Swift, though always the primary person of interest, appeared beyond the reach of prosecution until an unexpected turn of events changed everything. In early 2020, as COVID-19 brought courtrooms across Tennessee to a standstill, prosecutor Danny Goodman saw an opportunity. While others might have viewed the pandemic as another setback, Goodman and his team used the forced pause to dive deep into the case. In a small room filled with decades-old evidence, they began methodically reviewing approximately 30 bins of case files. Everyone before us was waiting for that one big piece of evidence that would crack the case wide open, Goodman would later tell the court. But that's not how this case worked. What we found instead was more like a puzzle. Dozens of small pieces that, when put together, told a story. The picture that emerged wasn't about a single violent act, but about control. As Karen built her own life in Dyersburg, teaching aerobics classes, cleaning houses, making new friends, David appeared increasingly desperate to maintain his grip on their marriage. The divorce papers Karen filed 3 weeks before her death seemed to mark a breaking point. The prosecution built their theory around the events of Halloween night 2011. According to their timeline, after Karen and Ashley returned from the party and fell asleep, David moved his daughter to another room. In the garage, they believed, he confronted Karen. The prosecution suggested he had grown desperate as his control slipped away, leading to a fatal confrontation. But defense attorney Daniel Taylor painted a starkly different picture of the Swift marriage. In his telling, David wasn't a controlling husband, but a concerned one, watching helplessly as his wife spiraled into concerning behavior. Taylor brought forward neighbors who testified about finding Karen unconscious at parties. The defense even suggested she had been involved in a local sex ring, though they offered no concrete evidence to support this claim. The physical evidence, or rather, its absence, became a central battleground. Taylor repeatedly highlighted the lack of blood evidence in the garage or car where prosecutors claimed the murder occurred. If Karen Swift was stomped to death in that garage, Taylor asked the jury, where's the blood? Where's the evidence of cleanup? 7 gallons of bleach makes for a good story, but the prosecution can't show it was used to clean up a crime scene. David's physical condition emerged as another key point of contention. His recent knee surgery and use of crutches seemed to make the prosecution's theory implausible. A physical therapist testified in detail about David's limited mobility during that period, describing how he struggled with basic movements, let alone the kind of violence the prosecution described. Perhaps the most damaging testimony for the prosecution came from an unexpected source, Ashley Swift herself. Now an adult, Ashley maintained with unwavering certainty that her mother, not David, had moved her to another room that night. "I'm comfortable going to my grave knowing it was my mom," she told the court, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. The prosecution struggled to explain several key contradictions. How could David have committed such a violent act while recovering from knee surgery? Why would he use his home's Wi-Fi to check Karen's secret phone after her disappearance, effectively leaving a digital fingerprint? If he had cleaned up a crime scene with bleach, why did forensics teams find no trace evidence? After weeks of testimony, the jury's verdict reflected the case's complexity. They found David not guilty of first- and second-degree murder, suggesting the prosecution hadn't proven premeditation or knowing action. However, they deadlocked on the voluntary manslaughter charge, unable to reach consensus on whether David had killed Karen in the heat of passion. The split verdict led to a mistrial on the manslaughter count. Today, David Swift awaits a new trial on that charge, while also facing unrelated stalking allegations from his ex-wife, Kelly Esmond, in Alabama. Some see these new allegations as validation of the prosecution's portrayal of David as controlling and potentially dangerous. Others view them as irrelevant to Karen's case, pointing out that behavior years later doesn't prove actions from the past. The Swift case stands as a testament to the challenges prosecutors face in domestic homicides, particularly when years pass before charges are filed. Physical evidence degrades, memories fade, and circumstances that seemed clear at the time become muddied by the passage of time. Even when prosecutors can construct a compelling narrative from circumstantial evidence, the high bar of beyond reasonable doubt may remain out of reach. In Dyersburg, the unresolved questions surrounding Karen's death continue to resonate. Her case serves as a reminder that justice, like truth, isn't always clear-cut. Sometimes it lives in the gray areas between what we think we know and what we can prove in court. The arrest of David Swift in August 2022 sent shockwaves through Dyersburg. After 11 years of whispers and speculation, the case that had haunted the community finally seemed headed toward resolution. But like so many aspects of Karen Swift's story, the truth would prove more complicated than anyone expected. For those who knew Karen, the years of waiting had been excruciating. Her children grew up under the shadow of unanswered questions, watching their mother's case go cold while living with their father, who remained the primary suspect. Ashley Swift, in particular, found herself in an impossible position, loving both parents while carrying the weight of being one of the last people to see her mother alive. The trial revealed deep fractures in how different members of the community remembered Karen. Prosecutors portrayed her as a woman seeking independence from a controlling marriage, pointing to her recent divorce filing and attempts to build her own life in Dyersburg. The defense team, however, painted a different picture, bringing forward neighbors who described concerning behavior at parties and suggesting Karen had been involved in activities that worried David. Ashley's testimony became a pivotal moment in the trial. Unlike many children in similar cases, she stood firmly in defense of her father. "I'm comfortable going to my grave, knowing it was my mom who moved me that night," she told the court, directly contradicting the prosecution's theory about David moving her before confronting Karen. The community struggled to reconcile these competing narratives. Many who had known Karen as a dedicated mother who worked multiple jobs to support her family found it difficult to accept the defense's characterizations. Others, particularly those who testified about Karen's behavior at parties, insisted they were simply telling the truth about what they had witnessed. The trial's outcome, not guilty of murder, but a hung jury on manslaughter, left many feeling that justice remained elusive. Some viewed the lack of a definitive verdict as a failure of the system, while others saw it as evidence of the case's complexity. The split decision seemed to reflect the community's own divided opinions about what really happened that Halloween night in 2011. Recent allegations against David Swift by his ex-wife, Kelly Esmond, have reopened old wounds in Dyersburg. Her claims of stalking behavior in Alabama echo the prosecution's portrayal of David as controlling, leading some to wonder if they had missed similar signs during his marriage to Karen. Others maintain that current allegations don't prove past guilt, especially given the jury's findings. The Swift case has left a lasting mark on Dyersburg's approach to domestic violence. Local law enforcement has revised its protocols for handling missing persons cases, particularly those with potential domestic elements. The community has become more attuned to warning signs in troubled relationships, though many acknowledge that such signs often become clear only in hindsight. Karen's legacy lives on through various community initiatives. Local domestic violence organizations now use her story to illustrate how abuse can hide behind seemingly normal facades. Her case has become a catalyst for discussions about relationship violence and the importance of supporting those seeking to leave troubled marriages. As David Swift awaits a new trial on the manslaughter charge, Dyersburg continues to grapple with unresolved questions. Was Karen a victim of domestic violence who died seeking independence, as prosecutors claimed? Or was her death, as the defense suggested, unconnected to the troubles in her marriage? The truth may lie somewhere between these extremes, in the complex reality of a relationship that ended in tragedy. For Karen's children, friends, and the broader community, the impact of her death extends far beyond the courthouse. Her story has become part of Dyersburg's fabric, a reminder that even in small towns where everyone seems to know their neighbors, crucial truths can remain hidden until it's too late. The Karen Swift case left an indelible mark on Dyersburg, Tennessee, though not in the way many true crime stories typically affect communities. Rather than fading into a cautionary tale, her case sparked difficult conversations about domestic violence and the complexities of proving such cases in court. The investigation and trial revealed uncomfortable truths about how communities view troubled marriages. During the proceedings, two conflicting narratives emerged. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman seeking independence from a controlling husband, while the defense portrayed David Swift as a concerned spouse worried about his wife's behavior. Neither version fully captured the complexity of their relationship. For Karen's children, the impact runs deeper than headlines or court proceedings suggest. They've had to reconcile their memories of both parents with the harsh realities revealed during the investigation. Ashley Swift, in particular, found herself in an impossible position, defending her father while mourning her mother. Her unwavering testimony that Karen, not David, moved her to another room that night became a crucial element in the trial's outcome. The passage of time has brought new perspective to the case. What initially seemed like a straightforward domestic homicide proved far more complex. The lack of physical evidence, conflicting testimonies, and years between crime and prosecution created reasonable doubt that the jury couldn't overcome. Their split decision, not guilty of murder, but deadlocked on manslaughter, reflects these complications. Karen's case has influenced how Dyersburg law enforcement handles domestic violence reports. Officers now receive additional training in recognizing subtle signs of control and coercion. The department has revised its protocols for missing persons cases, particularly those with potential domestic elements. These changes came too late for Karen, but may help future victims. Local domestic violence organizations have incorporated lessons from the Swift case into their outreach efforts. They emphasize how abuse isn't always visible to outsiders, and how victims often hide their struggles from even their closest friends. The organizations point out how Karen's multiple jobs and apparent independence masked deeper issues in her marriage. The community's response has evolved over time. Initial shock and horror gave way to more nuanced discussions about relationship violence, Support groups formed, not just for abuse survivors, but for families grappling with similar situations. These groups provide safe spaces for people to share concerns before situations escalate to violence. Recent developments have kept the case relevant. David Swift's current legal troubles in Alabama, where his ex-wife, Kelly Esmond, has accused him of stalking, echo elements of the prosecution's case about controlling behavior. However, the community remains divided on whether these new allegations should affect how they view Karen's death. The trial's outcome left many questions unanswered. While David Swift awaits a new trial on the manslaughter charge, debates continue about what really happened that Halloween night in 2011. The prosecution's theory about events in the garage conflicts with both the lack of physical evidence and David's documented knee injury. Ashley's testimony contradicts key elements of the state's timeline. Perhaps most significantly, the case challenged assumptions about what domestic violence looks like. Karen Swift didn't fit the stereotype of an abuse victim. She was financially independent, socially active, and taking steps to leave her marriage. Her story highlighted how control and coercion can exist even when traditional warning signs aren't present. The legal proceedings also expose the challenges prosecutors face in domestic homicide cases, especially when years pass before charges are filed. Physical evidence degrades, memories fade, and family loyalties complicate testimony. Even seemingly damning circumstances, like David's apparent controlling behavior or the timing of Karen's divorce filing, may not meet the threshold of proof beyond reasonable doubt. As Dyersburg continues to process the implications of this case, Karen's legacy endures through changed policies and heightened awareness. While justice in her case remains uncertain, the community's response has created mechanisms to better protect others in similar situations. Her story serves as a reminder that domestic violence can hide behind seemingly normal facades, and that communities must remain vigilant in supporting those seeking to break free from troubled relationships. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Karen's case is how it changed the community's perception of domestic violence. People in Dyersburg now understand that abuse victims don't fit neat stereotypes. They might be successful professionals, devoted parents, or active community members. The case demonstrated how financial independence doesn't always equal freedom from control. Karen's legacy lives on through various community initiatives, though not the sensationalized foundations and movements often fabricated in similar cases. Instead, her story influences local policy changes, law enforcement training, and domestic violence prevention efforts in more practical ways. The Swift case serves as a reminder that justice in domestic violence cases rarely follows a straight line. Physical evidence may be scarce, memories fade, and family loyalties complicate testimony. Even when prosecutors build compelling circumstantial cases, the high standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt may remain elusive. For Dyersburg residents, Karen Swift's story isn't just about tragedy. It's about recognizing how domestic violence can hide in plain sight. While the legal case remains unresolved, the community continues working to prevent similar tragedies through education, awareness, and support for those seeking to leave troubled relationships.